I can hear it now, creeping closer, each step a jagged scrape against the brittle ground. My heart thunders, blood pulsing in my ears. I don't dare look behind me. Every instinct screams to run, but my legs are locked in place, as though the very earth has decided to hold me captive. The silence that surrounds me is unnatural. It's suffocating, like the world has swallowed all sound except for the slow, deliberate footsteps behind me. My breath is shallow, jagged, as I struggle to gather enough strength to flee. Then, a whisper, no words, just a rush of cold, breathless air against my ear. I turn, but there's nothing there, only the dark wilderness stretching for miles. But I know, I can feel it. Something is hunting me. I stumble forward, my pulse crashing in my chest. The trees around me bend in unnatural angles, twisted as if they're reaching for me. I hear it again, a slow, raspy breath right behind me. I break into a sprint, but it's no use. I can hear its footsteps getting closer, and I know, I'm not going to make it out alive. My name is Aaron. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Truthfully, I've always been the kind of guy who prided myself on keeping my head together. I'm the one people call when they need a clear plan, when the situation's spiraling out of control. But I never expected my escape from the city to be a mistake. I'm not the most outdoorsy person, I'll admit. I prefer the concrete jungle to the actual one, but life had started feeling stifling, crowded, and too fast. So, when I was offered a cabin retreat in the middle of nowhere, deep in the backwoods of some remote forest, I thought it was exactly what I needed. A break from everything, a weekend of solitude and quiet. The drive up here had been long, winding, and quiet. No traffic, no other cars, just miles of dense forest surrounding me. I should have known something was off from the moment I got out of the car. The air had felt wrong. Thick, heavy, almost like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. At first, I didn't let it bother me. I'm not some paranoid type. But as I walked to the cabin, the hairs on the back of my neck had pricked up. I tried to shake off the feeling, dismiss it as nerves or maybe just too much isolation after being surrounded by the noise of the city for so long. The cabin itself was quaint, maybe a bit older than I expected, but I liked it. It had a charm to it. The kind of place you see in movies, tucked away in the woods with a crackling fireplace and the scent of pine and cedar in the air. It was exactly what I thought I needed. Inside, the place was clean, rustic, just the basics. A small kitchen, a worn couch by the fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs. A staircase led up to a loft, and the windows offered a view of nothing but trees for miles. I unpacked my bag and started a fire, settling in as the last remnants of daylight faded behind the trees. But that's when things started to get strange. The first sign wasn't obvious. In fact, it was so subtle that I almost dismissed it. The lights in the cabin flickered, just once or twice, right after I turned on the main light in the living room. Nothing big, nothing alarming, but enough to catch my attention. I shrugged it off as old wiring. It wasn't the first time I'd experienced that. But as I walked around the cabin, I noticed something else. The floorboards creaked underfoot, not in a natural, settling kind of way, but in an intentional way, like something, or someone, was walking just beneath me, matching my steps. I froze. My heart skipped, but there was nothing. No one. The silence that followed was oppressive, almost suffocating. I stood still for a moment, listening. The only sound I could hear was the crackle of the fire. It was ridiculous, I told myself. Just the cabin settling. I wasn't here long enough to start thinking I was hearing ghosts or whatever. I made my way to the kitchen, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and opened it. The cool rush of liquid helped, but the odd sense of being watched didn't leave. As I stood there, sipping the water, I glanced out the window. It wasn't much of a view, just trees, dense and dark, stretching as far as the eye could see, but something felt off about it. There was an unsettling stillness in the woods, like the trees were too quiet. No animals, no birds, not even the wind. The leaves hung motionless, suspended in time. I didn't know why it bothered me so much. I turned away from the window and tried to focus on the fire instead. But even that was starting to feel wrong. The flames, while warm, didn't seem to crackle like they should. Instead, they just licked at the logs, the crackling too soft and hollow. I thought about checking the logs, but before I could, I heard something that made me freeze again. A knock. 3 quick raps at the door. I didn't move at first. My heart pounded against my ribcage. The isolation of the place had already started to eat at me, but it wasn't like I was expecting company. No one knew I was here. The whole point of the retreat was to be alone. So why would someone knock? I forced myself to walk to the door, my footsteps deliberate but heavy. Every instinct was screaming at me to stay inside, to ignore it. But I couldn't. The curiosity burned too strong. I opened the door. No one was there. The porch was empty. I stared out into the dimming light, straining my eyes. But there was no one in sight. Nothing but the dense thicket of trees. I looked down, thinking maybe someone had dropped something, but there was nothing on the porch, except for a small folded piece of paper. I bent down slowly, picking it up. It was old, yellowed, and looked like it had been there for days, maybe weeks. I unfolded it carefully, the crinkling paper loud in the stillness. It read, "Don't trust the shadows." I laughed nervously. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I glanced around again, but nothing seemed out of place. The paper must have been left by someone who had come by earlier. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I turned and shut the door, trying to laugh off the weirdness, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The forest outside felt alive, like it was watching me, waiting. The night fell quickly, the darkness seeping in through the gaps in the cabin's windows. I stoked the fire and sat down on the couch, pulling a blanket over me as the wind began to pick up outside, rustling the branches of the trees. But just as I began to drift off, I heard it again. A sound. Not a knock this time, but a soft scraping. Like something was dragging across the ground. It was coming from the loft. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but when I glanced up at the ceiling, I saw the shadow of something moving in the corner of my eye. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just a branch scraping against the roof. But it felt too deliberate, too intentional. The air in the room grew heavier. My eyes began to burn, and my throat tightened. I could hear my breath, shallow and quick in the silence. I reached for my phone on the coffee table. The light from the screen was a small comfort, but it also made everything feel worse somehow. Notification popped up. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "Are you alone out there?" I froze, staring at the screen. The message didn't make sense. I hadn't shared my location with anyone. I was about to type back when I saw another message come through. "Don't go outside." I sat up straighter. My fingers trembled as I stared at the words. Who was sending this? The phone buzzed again, but when I checked it, there was nothing there. Only a blank screen, a dead signal. I tried to ignore the creeping sense of dread gnawing at me. The messages, could they be some prank, some sick joke? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I glanced up at the loft again. The shadow was still there, barely visible in the low light. And that scraping sound, it wasn't going away. I had to go check it out. I stood, my legs shaking as I made my way toward the stairs. Every creak of the wooden steps felt too loud in the oppressive quiet. When I reached the top, I found the loft empty, just a few old boxes and a dusty chair. But when I turned to leave, I saw something. A faint red stain on the floorboards. It looked fresh. I bent down to inspect it, my fingers grazing the cold wood. It wasn't blood, but it was something worse. Something that didn't belong. And that's when I heard it again. A whisper. Soft, barely audible. "You shouldn't have come." I stood frozen in place, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end, my breath hitched in my throat. Then the scraping began again, louder, closer, and that was when I understood. Whatever was out there, it wasn't letting me leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whispering, the message on my phone, the shadow in the loft, it all felt too real, too deliberate. I knew I couldn't stay up there any longer, so I quickly made my way back down the stairs, trying not to make a sound, though every creak of the floorboards felt like a gunshot in the silence. I forced myself to breathe. In, out. I had to stay calm. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I wasn't about to let fear control me. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me, just my mind playing tricks. I sat back down on the couch, clutching the blanket around me tighter, trying to ignore the unsettling sense of being watched. The room was still, save for the soft crackling of the fire. But then it happened again, a subtle shift in the air, like the room itself had exhaled. I didn't want to look up, didn't want to acknowledge what was happening, but I couldn't help it. My eyes moved toward the window, toward the dark wilderness beyond. The trees, even in the pale moonlight, seemed to sway unnaturally, their branches twisting, bending, reaching like long fingers. I blinked, but the movement didn't stop. It was almost as though the forest was alive in a way that wasn't natural, a way that felt wrong. I tried to turn away, but my gaze was glued to the window. Something was out there, something that was making the trees move, intentionally. I couldn't see what it was, but I knew it was watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, even through the glass. The air was colder now. I looked at the fire. The flames had grown higher, more violent. But the room around me had become unbearably still. Even the wind outside had stopped. There was no rustling of leaves, no birds, no animals, nothing. The forest had gone completely silent. I shivered, wrapping the blanket tighter around my shoulders. But the cold was seeping in, gnawing at my skin, turning my bones to ice. I stood up, heart pounding in my chest, and walked toward the window. There was nothing there, nothing but the trees. But somehow it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like something was hiding just beyond my view, something just out of sight, just beyond the edge of my perception. I wanted to leave. I wanted to pack up and drive away. But the forest had already made sure I knew there was no escape. Every time I thought of running, I imagined the trees closing in around me, trapping me, suffocating me. As I turned away from the window, my eyes caught something on the floor. Small, almost invisible in the dim light. A faint footprint in the dust. I stared at it, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. It was fresh. The imprint was deep, like something heavy had stepped there, but it wasn't mine. It didn't look human. The shape was wrong, too broad, too uneven. I bent down, my hand hovering over the floor, but I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Something deep inside me told me not to. My skin prickled, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end as I backed away slowly, every part of me screaming to leave. But I couldn't. It was like something was anchoring me to this place. A force I couldn't see but could feel, tightening its grip with each passing second. I turned around and froze. The loft door was open. It hadn't been when I had gone upstairs earlier, I was sure of it. But now it was wide open, dark and inviting. Something was waiting for me up there. I should have left. I should have run. But I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, as though it had been paralyzed by the oppressive presence that hung in the air. Every breath felt labored, every movement sluggish. It was as if the cabin itself was holding me in place, stopping me from escaping. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the open loft door. Then I heard it, a noise, soft, barely audible like a low murmur. It came from above, from the loft. I couldn't make out any words, just a low guttural hum, the kind that vibrated in your chest and made your skin crawl. It felt like it was coming from inside my own body, not from above, but deep within the walls of the cabin, deep within the trees outside. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. The sound of the hum intensified, growing louder, more insistent. and then the whispering started again. This time, it wasn't a soft murmur. It was clear, precise, like someone was right behind me, breathing into my ear. "You shouldn't be here." The opposite words were cold, sharp, like the chill that had settled in my bones. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. Nothing. I could feel my pulse in my temples, my hands clammy and shaking. I wanted to run, to get away from whatever was in the cabin, but I was frozen in place, like something invisible was holding me, binding me to this spot. The whispering continued, but now it wasn't just in my ear. It was all around me. It was everywhere. In the walls, in the air, in the fire. The very fabric of the room seemed to be alive with it. The words echoed in my mind, impossible to ignore, impossible to block out. It's already too late. I took a shaky step back. My legs, weak, and bumped into something. I whirled around, expecting to see someone there, but again, nothing. I felt it then, a cold hand, an icy touch on the back of my neck. I froze. My heart stopped in my chest. I could feel it, though. I could feel it there, hovering just behind me. The breath on my neck was wet, cold, like the presence itself was breathing down my spine. I turned quickly, but again, there was nothing. Just the empty room, the fire crackling, the silence that pressed in from all sides. I had to leave. I had to get out. But the door wouldn't open. I rushed to the front door, yanking at the handle. It was locked. How was it locked? I hadn't locked it. I had left it open when I came in. My hand fumbled over the latch, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though the cabin itself had sealed me in. I spun around in desperation, my mind racing. Why couldn't I leave? Why couldn't I escape? And that's when I saw it. A figure in the corner of the room. It was faint at first, just a shadow, a silhouette. But as I looked closer, it grew more solid, more real. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall, and its features were obscured by the dim light. But I could feel its eyes on me, watching me. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was human or something else, but I knew that it was hunting me. I took a step backward, my breath catching in my throat, but as soon as I moved, the figure did too. It was closer now. I couldn't breathe. The air had grown so thick, so oppressive, that every inhalation felt like I was drowning. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed by the feeling that this thing, whatever it was going to consume me. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. It was gone. But the whispering, it didn't stop. It echoed in my mind, louder now, until it felt like it was inside me. And in that moment, I realized the truth. The forest wasn't just outside, it was inside me too. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in that cabin, with the whispering pressing against my skull like an unbearable weight. My thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of it all, but the more I thought, the more confused I became. Nothing made sense anymore. The shadows weren't just shadows, they were alive. The whispering wasn't just a figment of my imagination, it was real. It was there, somewhere in the room, somewhere inside me. I stumbled backward, trying to catch my breath, but the air was thick, suffocating. My head was spinning, my heart pounding as if it were about to burst. The cabin was no longer a safe place. It had become a prison, a maze. The walls felt like they were closing in, the ceiling pressing down. My pulse echoed in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't think at all. I reached for the door again, hoping to break free, but it wouldn't open. The handle was still locked. The more I pulled, the tighter it seemed to get. I pounded on the wood with my fists, desperate, but it was useless. The door refused to yield. "Let me out!" I screamed, my voice cracking. But the only answer was the endless whispering that grew louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't be here." It was the same voice from earlier, the same voice that had echoed through my mind, cold and unyielding. I turned around, hoping for some form of clarity, but there was nothing. Just the room, just the fire, just the shadows stretching across the floor like tendrils. I felt dizzy, my vision blurred. My limbs felt heavy like they weren't my own, like I was a marionette being pulled in every direction. I sank to my knees, clutching my head, trying to ground myself. But I couldn't. The whispers had become voices, fragmented, overlapping, jumbled. It's already too late. You can't escape. You shouldn't have come. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, as if the air itself had become thick, toxic. My skin crawled. The very ground beneath me seemed to shift, and for a fleeting moment I thought I could hear something else, something beyond the whispering. A faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across the wood. My eyes snapped to the floor. My heart froze in my chest. The scratch marks, they were there, just like before. Faint, but undeniable. The same pattern, the same deep, jagged gouges in the wood. I didn't want to follow it. I didn't want to see where they led. But my body moved on its own, as if guided by some invisible force. I crawled toward the marks, my breath shallow and erratic, each scrape against the wood sending a ripple of dread through me. The marks led toward the loft again. I couldn't stop myself. I climbed to my feet, my legs trembling as I made my way toward the stairs. It felt as though something was pushing me, pulling me toward that darkness. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn around, but I couldn't. I had to know. I had to understand. I reached the top, my breath ragged, the air colder now, almost icy. The loft was silent, but the shadows seemed to pulse, to breathe, like they were waiting for me. I stepped forward, my legs weak beneath me, my eyes darting around the dimly lit space. The faint smell of something musty filled the air. It was the smell of decay, of rot. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I stepped into the center of the loft. And then I saw it. A small wooden box. It was old, dusty, and completely out of place. The kind of thing you'd see in an antique shop, something from another time. It sat in the far corner of the loft, as if it had been waiting for me. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it. My hand reached out on its own, trembling as I touched the lid. The moment my fingers brushed the wood, the whispering stopped. It wasn't a relief. It was worse. The silence that followed was suffocating. The box was now the only sound, the only thing that existed. My mind was screaming at me to leave, to throw the thing away and run, but I couldn't. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was yellowed, frayed at the edges, as though it had been there for years. I unfolded it slowly, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. Don't trust them. My stomach twisted. I couldn't make sense of it. My mind was still reeling from the whispers, from the scratching noises, from the feeling that something was very wrong, but this was different. This was something tangible, something I could hold in my hands, and it felt like the last piece of the puzzle. And that's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl, rising from the darkness. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the trees. It was something else. Something alive. Something close. My heart slammed into my chest, my breath catching in my throat. I turned toward the stairs. The moment I did, the growl stopped, but the silence was worse. I glanced back at the box, the piece of paper, and my mind began to spiral. What was happening? Was this real? Was I losing my grip on reality? My own thoughts began to betray me, mixing with the echoes of the whispers, the growls, the scratching. What was real? Was it the messages, the marks, the whispers? Or was I simply losing my mind, trapped in the depths of fear and isolation? How much of this was me, my own mind unraveling, and how much was something else? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself, but when I opened them again, I was no longer alone. The figure was standing in front of me. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its face was blurred, as if the very air around it was warping, distorting, hiding its true form. I could feel its presence like a weight pressing against me, suffocating me. "You can't leave," it whispered, its voice deeper, more menacing than before. It wasn't the same whisper I had been hearing. This one was heavy, like a command, like an undeniable truth. I staggered back, my legs buckling beneath me, but the figure remained. It didn't move, didn't even breathe. It was just there, waiting. I had no idea how long I sat there, huddled on the floor, staring at the figure. Time seemed to blur, like it had stopped altogether. Then, as if the world was shifting around me, the figure spoke again. "You have to choose." The words echoed in my skull, reverberating through my thoughts. I felt the weight of it, felt the pressure build in my chest, tightening my ribs. "What choice?" I whispered, barely able to speak, barely able to breathe. It didn't answer, but somehow I knew what it meant. The choice was mine. I could stay. I could remain in the cabin, in the darkness, where the whispers would continue, where the figure would wait, where the nightmare would never end. Or I could leave. But what awaited me outside? Would the forest be any better? Or was it all just a trap, an illusion, a game I couldn't win? My mind screamed for escape, for freedom, but my body didn't move. The choice was too much, it felt too final, and no matter what I decided, I knew it wouldn't matter. Either way, I was already lost. I don't remember standing up, but somehow I was on my feet, my body moving as if it had become an extension of the darkness itself. The figure in the corner was still there, watching me, waiting. Its silhouette was solid now, but still shifting, still morphing with every blink. The longer I looked at it, the more its shape seemed to blur. It was as though the thing wasn't meant to be seen, like its true form existed just beyond my understanding, taunting me with its unknowable presence. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step back, my eyes never leaving the figure. I should have run. I should have done anything to get away from it, but I couldn't. Something inside me, something primal, told me that no matter how far I ran, it would always find me. I had to leave the cabin. I had to escape this place. I had to get out of the reach of whatever it was. But every inch of my body was heavy, like it was weighed down by the very air around me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every step felt like I was wading through quicksand, my limbs fighting against me, my mind unraveling as the thing in the corner grew more solid, more real. "You can't leave," the figure whispered, its voice now low and guttural, an ancient sound that scraped against the walls of my mind. It was inside my head, inside my very soul, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, it was closer. I didn't hear it move. There was no sound, no breath, no sign of its presence other than the crushing weight of its gaze. But it had moved, and now it stood just a few feet away, its form towering over me. The air between us felt charged, like electricity crackling in the space, static thickening the air, curling around me like a suffocating fog. My body tensed, my legs trembling beneath me as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The thing, whatever it was not human. Its limbs were too long, too unnatural. The skin stretched over its form like a grotesque parody of flesh. It had no face, at least not one I could comprehend. Just a smooth, featureless surface where eyes should have been, where a mouth should have been. Instead, it was like a blank canvas, as though its existence was defined not by its appearance, but by the feeling it invoked. A feeling of wrongness, of dread. And then, the whispers started again. Only this time, they weren't whispers. They were screams. Not loud, not immediate, but distant, echoing, like a memory, like the ghost of something that had happened a long time ago, but refused to be forgotten. The screams came from every direction, inside my head, inside the cabin, inside the walls themselves. "You're not real," the voice repeated, its tone growing more distorted, more unnatural. The floor beneath me groaned as though the house itself was responding to the presence of the thing before me, groaning and shifting in response to the weight of its being. The walls seemed to bend inward, the wood creaking and splintering. I stumbled backward, my legs refusing to support me. "I've been here before," I murmured, the words slipping from my lips before I could stop them. And it was true. It was like a wave crashing over me, a memory not my own, a knowledge seeping into my consciousness. The floor, the walls, the air, the way the silence felt so suffocating. I had been here. I had been here before. I tried to shake the thought, to push it away, but it lingered like a shadow, haunting every thought, every breath. I had been here. But why? What was I missing? Before I could dwell too much on that thought, the figure moved again. It didn't walk. It didn't shuffle. It shifted, like smoke, like darkness itself. In an instant, it was no longer in front of me, but behind me, the air, growing colder as the temperature in the room dropped. The fire in the hearth sputtered out, its flames dimming to nothing. "You shouldn't have come back." The voice came from all directions, echoing in the walls, the floor, the very air around me. I whirled around, my heart racing, but it was too late. The figure was right there, right in front of me. "You're part of it now." I backed away, my mind scrambling to comprehend the impossible, but the figure just watched. It didn't move, didn't attack. It only waited. And that's when I saw it. The mark. It was on the wall now, scrawled in blood-red paint. It was the same mark I had seen before, the one on the piece of paper, the one I had found in the box in the loft. It wasn't a simple design. It was intricate, winding, like a twisted symbol, a sigil meant for something ancient, something that had never been meant to exist in this world. The air grew thick, stifling. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The figure in front of me was growing more tangible, more real. The edges of its form were sharpening, becoming more defined. I had been here before. The mark on the wall, the way the whispers surrounded me, the way the air tasted so heavy, the creeping feeling of inevitability. I had been here before. And now, the truth hit me like a brick. I wasn't trapped in this cabin. This cabin wasn't trapping me. It was part of it. I had never left. I had never escaped. This wasn't some random cabin in the woods. This wasn't some simple retreat. This was a loop. The room, the figure, the whispers, the marks. They were all part of it. The same haunting, the same endless cycle. Every time I thought I had escaped, I had just returned. Every time I thought I had left, I had just come back. And now, I was caught, trapped in a cycle with no escape, no way out. The air was thick, with the presence of the figure, the looming entity that hovered just outside my comprehension. I couldn't see its true form, couldn't grasp it, but I could feel it. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't an entity. It was the thing that controlled this place, the force behind the cabin, behind the endless loop, behind the whispers. "You will never leave," it said, its voice distorted and cold. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it all. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent now. I had been here before. I would be here again. I was part of it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then, the door. The front door, which had been locked, which had refused to open before. Now, it was wide open. I blinked, disbelief clouding my thoughts. How? How had it opened? I had tried. No, we had tried. Everything to escape. And yet, there it was. The outside world, the dark forest, the silent trees, the open night sky. The door was an illusion. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Because, deep down, I knew that no matter how many times I tried, no matter how many times I reached for the door, no matter how many times I ran, I would always find myself here again, trapped in the loop. The figure stepped forward. "You can never escape." And then I understood. I had never left. I had never been meant to. The door. The door stood wide open in front of me, beckoning like a promise, like salvation itself. The night air poured in, cool and damp, carrying the smell of the forest, the promise of freedom. But even as I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, I knew it wasn't real. It couldn't be. I had been tricked before. The loop had played its hand, luring me out with the illusion of an escape, only to pull me back into the dark, endless cycle. But there was something else now. Something new. I had to leave. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't face this thing any longer. This nightmare. This creature that had become the center of my existence. The whispers. The scratching. The marks on the walls. The figure in the corner. Everything was part of it. But the door, this time it felt different. It was real, wasn't it? Wasn't it? My pulse raced in my ears as I took a step forward. The wind outside rushed in, chilling me to the bone, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The door had been locked before. I had tried it. But now it was wide open, as if it had always been waiting for me. I glanced over my shoulder. The figure was still there, standing just outside the range of the firelight, its features twisted, its form still shifting and warping like something that shouldn't be. It hadn't moved. It hadn't made a sound. It was waiting. I could hear the whispers again, but this time, they were quieter, more distant. It doesn't want you to leave, they seemed to say. It doesn't want you to escape. I shook my head, pushing the thoughts away, focusing only on the door, on the outside world. I had to get out. I had to be free. I took another step. The cold air wrapped around me, sinking into my skin. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not now. I was so close. I reached the threshold, my foot hovering just over the threshold. My body was trembling, my breath shallow and quick. But just as I was about to cross into the darkness beyond the cabin, something happened. The door slammed shut. A violent gust of wind slammed it with a force that shook the entire cabin. The noise was deafening and I stumbled back, my chest tight, my mind screaming. The room seemed to close in around me, and I was suffocating again, trapped in the small space with the figure, with the creature, with the thing that had been haunting me. I turned, desperately trying to pull the door open again, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, as if sealed shut by something beyond my control. The handles were cold beneath my hands, as though the very door itself had become a part of the nightmare. And then that voice, the one that had been tormenting me, had been inside my head, spoke again. You can't leave. You've never left. The whispers became louder, more insistent. The walls seemed to close in, the cabin feeling smaller and smaller, like it was shrinking, contracting around me. I backed away, my mind racing for answers, for some way out. But the more I thought, the more I realized that the door was never an escape. The cabin was never a place I could leave. I had been here before. I had never left. I hadn't just wandered into a trap. This place was never meant for me to escape from. It was part of something else, something larger, something ancient and incomprehensible. It wasn't just a cabin in the woods. It wasn't just a place where I had come to stay. It was part of the loop. It was part of its game. And then, I saw it. The figure in the corner. It wasn't alone anymore. There were others like it. They appeared from the shadows, slipping from the corners of the room, moving silently, fluidly, like smoke, like shadows themselves. There were dozens of them now, all standing there, their forms twisting and contorting with every glance, their faceless shapes warping before my eyes. They were everywhere. You've always been here, one of them whispered. And for the first time, I recognized the voice. It wasn't the one from before, the one I had been hearing all this time. No, this voice was mine. I staggered back, my hands raised to shield my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No, this can't be real. But it was. One of the figures moved closer, stepping forward into the flickering light. It was me. My own face, my own body, but twisted, distorted. Its eyes were black holes, empty and endless, and its smile was nothing more than a jagged, broken line that stretched too wide, too far. "You were never meant to leave," it said in my voice, its tone a mockery of everything I had ever been. I gasped, stumbling back, my mind crashing with the sudden realization. It had always been me. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the one being hunted. I was the thing. I had always been the thing. The cabin, the loop, the whispers, the figure, the marks on the walls. All of it. It was me. It had always been me. My own twisted reflection, my own distorted memories, my own nightmare. I wasn't stuck in some cabin in the woods. I was trapped inside my own mind. The faces around me. They weren't creatures, they weren't demons. They were me, my fears, my regrets, my darkness taking shape and becoming real. And now, I had no way out. There was no escape, no door, no freedom. Only the endless loop, only the endless me. "You've always been here." The creature that looked like me whispered again, its voice echoing in my mind. "You'll never leave." I backed into the corner, my body trembling, my eyes darting around the room, searching for something, anything that would make sense. But there was nothing. Only the figures, only the twisted versions of myself, only the darkness. And then, the figure that was closest to me, the one with my face, reached out. Its fingers were long and bony, reaching for me, and I could feel the pull, the gravity, the inevitability of it. My own hand reached out in response, moving without my control, and I knew that I couldn't resist. I couldn't fight it. I had already given in. The darkness engulfed me, and the last thing I heard was the whispers that had been my own voice all along. "You can never leave." And then, silence. I awoke with a start. The cold air stung my skin, the same dampness from before, the same chill creeping through my bones. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls. But there was no warmth to it, only a sickly glow that seemed to mock me. I was lying on the floor again, just like before, as if nothing had changed. I blinked, my head pounding, my thoughts scrambled. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, my body shaking uncontrollably. I sat up, looking around the cabin. Everything was exactly as it had been when I first arrived. The same wooden walls, the same mismatched furniture, the same suffocating silence. But I knew, deep down, something had shifted. Something was different. It was the same place, the same cabin, but everything felt heavier. The air was thick with it, like I was suffocating in my own fear. I stood, my legs weak beneath me, my mind racing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I had been here before. I had been here 1,000 times before. I took a hesitant step forward, my heart hammering in my chest. The door was ajar. The same door. The same invitation to the outside world. But I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything anymore. The whispers started again, low and distant at first, but growing louder, more insistent. I closed my eyes, trying to block them out, trying to ignore the voices that had haunted me since I first set foot in this place. I turned around. There it was, the figure. It stood in the corner, its shape more defined now, more real, its faceless form looming in the shadows. It wasn't just watching me anymore. No, this time, it was waiting. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. The door. No, I couldn't. I couldn't trust it. I couldn't escape. I'd tried before. I knew better now. "You've always been here," it whispered. And I realized then, with a sickening clarity, that it was right. This was my reality. I wasn't trapped in a cabin. I was trapped in my own mind, caught in a cycle that I could never break free from. I had been here before. I would always be here. And no matter how many times I ran, no matter how many times I tried to leave, I would never escape. The door, the whispers, the figure, the cabin. I had always been here. But then in the corner of my eye, I saw something else. The mark. The same symbol that had been etched into the wall, the same sigil that had taunted me for so long. It wasn't just on the wall anymore. It was on me. I could feel it, the weight of it, burned into my skin. It wasn't a mark that could be erased. It was a part of me, a part of the loop. The last whisper came, louder than the rest, filling my mind with its chilling clarity. You'll never leave. And in that final moment, as the cabin closed in around me, as the weight of the loop crushed me, I understood. The door was never meant for me to open. It had always been locked. It was always locked.